In the 1980s, Christmas time was very, very different to what it is now. It wasn't all about iPhones and gadgets, it was all about toys, catalogues, and the anticipation of what toy you would get over Christmas. Today's video is a documentary on the girls' toys that were released in the 1980s. And of course, we all recognise this face. It's Gavin-Lee Pates of Retro D Toys. We're going to take a quick look at his store towards the end of the video because he actually specialises in vintage girls' 80s toys. So we're going to start our journey off all the way back to 1983 with Cabbage Patch Dolls. These were designed by Coleco with a special adoption certificate. They became hugely popular, and Black Friday 1983, these dolls absolutely erupted, and you're going to see that now in the video.
They're out of them.
And how many stores have you tried?
3 stores at the mall.
After talking with a number of toy department managers and finding out that there's only going to be a few more of these Cabbage Patch dolls actually shipped into our area between now and Christmas, chances are that the closest thing any of us are going to see to the actual doll is if we take one and cut it out of one of the newspaper ads.
All of those people are pushing and shoving to get one of these. They're Cabbage Patch Dolls, and I talked to some people to find out why they'd want to go through all this just to get a doll. We've been out in line about 5 hours, and my mother wants a doll for the grandchildren. I have 2 boys, but everybody tells me they're going to be collector's items.
How long have you been standing in this? 4 o'clock this morning. It was worth it. I got one.
Why?
Why? Because I have a granddaughter that's heart and soul, Melissa France, and she is just patiently waiting for her birthday.
One woman was injured when there was a fight over a doll. The woman was treated and released from Nosey General Hospital.
It's 7 o'clock out there, and we just pushed in like cattle. It was ungodly. I'm very disappointed that my daughter won't have one for Christmas.
The FBI has handled strange cases before, but this is a strange one. A counterfeit Cabbage Patch doll ring.
The individual that we arrested in New Jersey claimed that he had already sold 30,000 of these counterfeit dolls.
This is one of the counterfeit Cabbage Patch dolls, which were allegedly selling for $12. This is the real thing, which is selling for $8 or $10 more if you can find one. Can you find any differences between the two? Well, the real doll has dimples. The fake does not. The real one has a navel. The fake does not. The real one has thumbs. The fake does not. And on the neck of the real one is a trademark, which is difficult to show on camera, but it is there. The FBI agents moved in on this novelty store on Broadway and seized perhaps 1,000 counterfeit Cabbage Patch dolls, carrying them out by the case. And inside they arrested Mr. Bendar Wu, who is charged with allegedly selling the dolls to an undercover investigator.
Cabbage Patch Dolls would continue to be very popular until around about 1987. However, the lady was right. They did become collector's items, and some of them can fetch up to £100 today. It was 1982 and Hasbro unleashed My Little Pony onto the market. My Little Pony is probably the biggest girls' toy that's ever been made. But in the beginning it wasn't expected to do very well. There wasn't a lot of hope for My Little Pony, A year before, in 1981, Hasbro had released a concept called My Pretty Pony. Now, My Pretty Pony was a lot bigger than My Little Pony. It got hard plastic and it just really flopped. In fact, Hasbro were putting all their eggs in one basket and expecting Charmkins to be the star seller of Hasbro toys in 1982. So My Little Pony was just a secondary concept really, as like a backup to Charmkins. But as we all know, Charmkins failed. My Little Pony was a great success. The architect of My Little Pony was definitely Bonnie Zackerley. She scaled the pony down to a smaller size. She used soft plastic. Initially, Bonnie, she wanted to design all the ponies in neutral colours like blacks, whites, things that would look quite natural. But in the end, Hasbro decided to go along with the pastel colour concept. Sadly, Bonnie did leave Hasbro and went across to Parker Brothers just before My Little Pony became a big success. There's a massive market for collectors in My Little Pony, and some of these European exclusive ones can fetch into the hundreds. More common little ponies from the 80s can be picked up really cheap. Back in 1983, Kenna released a very colourful, very popular bear known as the Care Bear. Now, the Care Bears originated from a card company called Hallmark. It's another real fascinating story of how a card company spawned into an animated series and then ultimately this toy line. Today there's a massive fan base for collecting Care Bears, and some of these Care Bears can be very expensive to buy, particularly the European exclusives. In 1985, and Tonka launched a line called Keepers. Keepers were quite different. They came out in the form of a rabbit, snail, all kinds of animals really, and they each had what you call a finder figurine that was with it. Came with a comb too, and the idea of Keepers was they got a secret compartment that you could lock up and you could hide away all your hidden treasures. So it was quite a novel toy of its time. Very popular and still very collectible today. (1985) saw the inception of Teddy Ruxpin. This was designed by a company called Worlds of Wonder. Not really heard of, to be honest, but they came up with this animatronic teddy bear that could tell you stories, and to make it more fun they introduced it as Teddy Ruxpin and Friends, so you got more characters. So the concept was you'd have loads of story tapes, you'd put them in the back of the teddy, press play, and he would tell you stories, and it was iconic of its time. They later went on to bring about a bit of a TV show for Teddy Ruxpin, but it didn't really take off. However, it's still a beloved item of the 1980s, and if you're trying to buy one today, collecting wise, you're looking at quite a bit of money, potentially anything up to £80 to £100. Gem and the Holograms, 1987. Very interesting story. Gem and the Holograms was a concept of Hasbro in collaboration with Marvel Studios. That's right, the famous G.I. Joe makers. The story was Gem was a big rock star in a band called Synergy, and Hasbro had planned to release a doll unlike any other doll of its time. A rock star doll. Unfortunately, Mattel didn't like that, and Mattel beat them to the punch with Barbie and the Rockers. The quality of Gem dolls were exceptional, and they did far better than Barbie and the Rockers. Back in 1987, Mattel came out with a toy line called Barbie and the Rockers, and to be honest, there's no real nice way of putting this, but it was just a complete rip-off of Gem. So Gem had been on TV from 1985. Hasbro had collaborated with Marvel Studios and come up with a really good idea in Gem and the Holograms, and they just took a little bit too long to get the merchandise to market, and within 4 months, believe it or not, Mattel had actually beat them. They brought out Barbie and the Rockers, and to get all that stock out in 4 months is just insane. There was quite a lot of similarities with Barbie and the Rockers to Gem, and one of the big ones was the cassette that came with the doll. But if you look back in history, I think Gem and the Holograms was a better quality doll of the two lines. In 1985, Shirro, Princess of Power, was developed by Mattel. Now this was a direct spin-off from He-Man, Masters of the Universe. And the thing was, He-Man was actually becoming really popular amongst the girls. So Shirro was launched. And it lasted for a couple of years. There was a TV series that was on a parallel planet to He-Man. And around about the years of 1985 to 87 was the crash of He-Man, and a lot of toy developers in Mattel blamed Shirro on He-Man's decline. There's definitely no proof of that at all, but still, it's a very interesting toy line and it was very collectible during the 80s. In 1987, Kenna decided to try and follow up the success of My Little Pony with Hasbro by introducing a line called Fashion Star Feelies, and this was really an epic fail for Kenna. It was on a larger scale to My Little Pony. They were hard plastic horses, probably the size that would be compatible with a Barbie doll, and the whole idea of them was that they were fashionable and you could accessorise them. Unfortunately, they didn't really make it. In 1987, Sylvan Families first came to the UK and they were marketed by Tomy as a toy line, and obviously you'd got the TV show. Originally though, Sylvan came about in Japan in 1985. It was a little gaming company called Epoch that designed them. Sylvan Families arguably are the best quality toy of the 80s. If you look at the realism, so basically you get families of like 4 or 5, like the Rabbit family or, I don't know, Bear family, and they all had like mohair sort of fur. And the thing about Sylvan Families that made them so special was the world that you created. If you look at some of the houses, not just the houses that have got real working lights, but some of the accessories, they're just so realistic. And that's what made Sylvanian special, really, and that's why, to this day, Sylvan Families is still very big. In 1984, the card companies did it yet again. This time it was Hallmark cards. They introduced the Rainbow Brite line, and it started off as a card, then an animated series, then eventually there was all kinds of merchandise and products. And for 1984, Rainbow Brite was quite big, but unfortunately it kind of fizzled out a little bit after that. Still, it's an iconic toy line, bright and colourful, it resonates the 80s. Strawberry Shortcake was licensed by Kenna in 1979. It was actually designed, though, by a lady called Barbie Sargent in 1973, and it was used on the very popular American greeting cards company. These cards became really big because the artwork was just very charming. It was based on a rag doll, and obviously she lived in a strawberry house. There's a whole story behind it. But that was the genius of Barbie Sargent. She came up with something that was iconic. These cards were popular all over Europe, and eventually she used her art and she spawned it into a toy line. And for me, that is inspirational and inspiring for a lot of young artists today. So the toy line, you got the smaller dolls where you could buy clothes from and different things. And also you got the larger rag dolls. What really made Strawberry Shortcake popular was the cartoon that was put on in the early 80s. After this, the toys became really popular, and there was a lot of adverts put out there advertising these toys. The main feature being about these dolls was they had a smell to them, and they actually gained this by using chemicals in the paint to make them smell like strawberries, lemons, and all kinds of things like that. These toys today are worth quite a bit of money if you can get your hands on them, and the toy line has survived to the current day. Baby Talk was designed by Galoob in 1985, and 1985 was really the era of talking dolls because you'd got Cricket and there was a few other lines. You also got the Teddy Ruxpin doll. These dolls didn't really last for a very long time, and they was very expensive to buy, brand new. And today, if you want to buy them on the second-hand market, you're looking at around about £45 upwards. In 1986, Playmates released a doll called Cricket, and this doll was like really revolutionary for the time, very similar to Teddy Ruxpin in the sense it had a tape in it. Designed by Larry Jones, marketed by Playmates, this doll had also got a variety of clothes to choose from, a variety of stories to tell. Sadly, the doll line did not have a very long life, and for collectors trying to find them now, you're looking at £100 to £200 per doll. In 1989, Mattel were trying something a little bit different with Little Miss makeup. This doll was more about fashion than talking, and it got quite a few concepts. So basically, you could add makeup just by adding water to certain parts of the body. You could put nail varnish on, you could put lipstick on. This doll line would continue to go on into the early 90s, I believe, before it finally fizzled out. If you find these dolls today, you could pick them up fairly cheap, to be honest, £20 to £25. In 1988, Fisher-Price designed a concept called Precious Places, and I think it might have been in answer to Sylvan Families. This is actually a really good toy line for girls, but for some reason it didn't seem to take off. So it was based on, you were building a city, and this city was controlled by a magnetic key. You'd use the magnetic key and it would move the people around, move the cars around, the horse and carts, and also it would also operate the lights. So it was a brilliant concept, but there don't seem to be a lot of history on this toy line, and for some reason it flopped. I'm not sure why. These toys are really hard to find now, and they do command really high prices. In 1984, Hasbro were lining up Charmkins to be their biggest toy of the year. They had My Little Pony as like a secondary backup. However, we all know how the story worked out, with My Little Pony being the biggest seller. Anyway, the Charmkins, they were designed as little charms that would turn into like little figures that would fit on scented jewellery. They launched a TV series to promote it, and unfortunately it really flopped in the 80s. It was a great concept, and there's a lot of collectors still collecting these, and to try and find these now on the second hand market, you're looking at around about £40 to £80. Also in 1984, Galoob did something quite clever by coming up with Sweet Secrets. Now these basically were like cosmetic sets, they were makeup, they were jewellery. I think the genius here was they kind of combined Charmkins and the success of Takara Transformers into one item. It was a clever little ploy to compete with Charmkins that was going around about the same time. And although they had a short lifespan, they did actually do quite well in sales. These are quite common and quite easy to find in the second-hand market, and you're looking at roughly around about £25 to £30 per charm. In 1984, Kenna also licensed Rose Petal Place, which had previously been like a TV show, and it had got very similar Strawberry Shortcake vibes. It's all about fruits and desserts, and it's basically got that sort of very charming Strawberry Shortcake artwork. Now I believe these dolls did come out in different scented aromas, and they only had a very short spell during the 80s, but still they're worthy of a mention. Because they had such a short run, they are quite hard to find on the second hand market, but they're fairly inexpensive to buy. In 1979, Kenna launched the Seawees. It was more of a toy that was sold in the 1980s, so that's why I'm classing it to this video. The Seawees, each doll came with a lily pad, sometimes they had like a little sister, and it was just really another indication of how strong Kenna were in the girls' toy market in the 1980s. Great company, Kenna. I'm going to do a documentary about them soon. These dolls can be picked up really cheap nowadays if you're lucky enough to find one. In 1985, Parker Brothers released the Nerfle line. Now the architect of Nerfles was Bonnie Zackerley, who is famously known as the My Little Pony architect. Now Nerfles really was a bit of a disappointment. They didn't really take off. The idea was they had interchangeable hats, clothes, hairstyles, and they came with a variety of vehicles. They were marketed quite well. The adverts were really good, but unfortunately I think it was always a regret of Bonnie Zackerley, because she actually left Hasbro and went across to Parker Brothers to work on Nerfle, not realising quite how big My Little Pony was going to be. Still, these Nerfles are very collectible. They can be quite tricky to find, but aren't really that expensive unless you find the mail-away version, which is worth nearly £300. In 1988, Cherry Merry Muffin was released by Mattel. Now, this sort of doll was a scented doll, very similar to the Strawberry Shortcake, and the rose petal cottage sort of theme going on. However, what they'd done with these toys, they'd actually brought baking to life. So all of these toys come with baking accessories. The idea was baking muffins. Some of the accessories that came along with Cherry Merry Muffin were transforming accessories. They came a little bit later, and as you can see in the picture here, these are like the transforming accessories. They're very whimsical, very charming, and basically Cherry Merry Muffin just brought the whole world of baking alive. This toy line did quite well. It went on for about 3 series, and it was sold all the way across Europe. I think Argentina was the only country that didn't sell that. I might stand corrected on that. The dolls are collectible today, probably not the most collectible doll, and trying to find examples of these on eBay can be a little bit tricky, as most of these were produced in the USA. 1985 was proving to be a very big year for toys, as the Wuzzles was released by Hasbro. Now, the whole concept of the Wuzzles was created by Fred Wolf, and there was to be a TV animated series with Disney and Hasbro in collaboration. The toy line, the plushies that were released before the animated series were put out, and the adverts rolled out about early 1985, and they were quite a big success at the time. There was roughly 5 or 6 characters to choose from, and then obviously when the animated series came out, very short-lived, very humorous, and for a short period of time in 1985, the Wuzzles was a very successful toy line. Because these plushies were quite mass produced at the time, they are quite easy to find and they're quite common to buy, and they'll set you back around about £30 to £50. In 1986, the Popples was launched by Mattel. Now, this was another TV show turned toy. The great thing about Popples was there was a plush toy that had the ability to fold into a ball, and literally there were quite a lot to collect. At the time, it was kind of a new gimmick, a teddy bear that actually folds into a ball, and they were quite popular back in 1986. Collecting these today, it all depends on rarity. Sometimes you're looking at £30 to £40 on these. On other occasions, you can pick them up for about £10. In 1987, Play School came out with the concept of Nosey Bears. Now, the bear industry at the time was dominated by bears like Teddy Ruxpin and things like that were really dominating the market. So Play School came up with this concept of Nosey Bears. And these bears, there's 12 to collect in all. They're all very colourful, but the best feature about these, which makes them unique, is they have these little features on the nose. So there's all these like little games with inside of the teddy, and they were quite popular back in that year. They sold quite a lot of units at Toys R Us. To buy them today, you're looking at about £30. In 1983, the Getalong Gang was released by Tomy, but it was actually the American card company that was responsible for this line. It started out again as a movie, and there was 6 misfits that kind of like was always getting into trouble all the time, and they became the Getalong Gang. Now, the Getalong Gang toy line followed around about 1984. There was plushes that were released, and there were the smaller vinyl figures that was released. These are quite easy to find today. The plushes are a little bit harder and will cost you about £30 to £40, whereas the smaller vinyl figures you're looking at £5 to £10 each. The best place to find vintage girls' toys in the UK is Retro D Toys, run by Gavin.
Retro D Toys?
Gavin's become quite a big character in the vintage toy world, as he was on Vintage Leicester Toy Store on tour. If you remember those videos, they were quite funny. and now he's got his own shop. So he's primarily focusing on girls' toys, and he's getting virtually every single girls' toy line that you can imagine in stock. So it's a great experience going down there. It's like a toy museum almost. And it's not just that, it's also a very, very good atmosphere. Good vibes, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. And Gavin will always give you a good fair price on anything that you trade in. He's also working on a new project which I'm not going to say anything about. You'll see in the future.
Girl toy cabinet. We can call it that because they were toys made for girls back then. That's how it was.
Oh, yeah.
Ponies, Wuzzles was one of my absolute favourites. My very favourite, Getalong Gang up the top there.
Oh, Getalong Gang, yes.
Awesome.
Here,
yeah. I've just bought a full Clubhouse caboose set.
This Cabbage Patch, which I've never seen. You want to tell me who that
Cabbage
is?
Patch Coosers. They made like animal versions of them, and like people didn't really like them, but I think they're really sweet. I think they're nice.
Yeah, they're pretty cool, aren't they?
Oh, good.
So,
retro toys.
okay, guys, get yourself down here. It's in Nuneaton, and it is a really good shop.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Retro toys.
Okay, guys, get yourself down here. It's in Nuneaton, and it is a really good shop.
Thank you.
Cheers, mate.